We've been working on wattles for a long time, and that's a debate that needs to happen between DEA and the Working for Water program and the people who understand the impacts of these clearing operations.
Yeah.
So there's nothing clear yet.
No.
Well, there are some things that are very clear that we shouldn't be doing, but it's very difficult to communicate that with DEA and the implementing agents.
So the next time we came, we did focus groups, and we separated women and men. And there are different reasons for this. So for one, you can't have a huge group. You need to have a certain size to have good discussions. So we could accommodate more people. And also, women have some different issues to talk about than men. So doing this enabled us to get more views and to have the group size that worked for us. And I think it proved really good that we did this. So we had about 2 hours discussions in each group. And as you can see, we had quite a large group. So this is the group after the discussions. And James and the men, they were actually starting in a smaller room. And then they got more and more and more. So it was quite a big group. But it was really nice. We learned so much from these groups and the insights. And we will share some of these insights later after going through the photos. And then we had the big...
Sorry?
About youth.
The youth was also, so we invited, you can see here, some young people. So we said specifically, and some younger women, it's a bit hard to see here on these photos, but we made a point to please also get youth, because we need them, we need their views. They're often excluded, so you could say in some way they're also marginalized.
Yeah.
And what I learned also from other parts in Africa, Mali, Uganda, a youth is considered up to the age of 35. What is it here? Is it also 35?
Yeah.
You see, so, that is a long time to get to an age where you can actually have more rights or ownership. So yes, the youth was represented here as well.
But it's a good question because they often feel very disconnected from agriculture and issues around livestock, for example, especially if you don't own cattle yourself. Yeah.
So we had also arranged for food, and of course the women do the cooking. So you can see activities here around preparing food. Also, in each community, the community members contributed some vegetables, which was really nice. So we had a combined meal of traditional foods, and we had nice interactions and sharing food and having more conversations by doing that. Then we went to Makheni, so we had a first initial visit. Then we did a transect walk here as well, and again we climbed up on a hill with Nkambi. She guided us, and so we walked up, we looked at the wattle here, so there were some samples. Maybe James, you could say something.
Yeah, the guy there with the wattle is Cletus from Stellenbosch. So what he wants to do is take those back, different samples from different parts of the community to see if there's any differences in the nutritional quantity. But also, I think he's got samples of silver and black wattle there. So he's trying to get a cross-section of various things, basically. So he's going to take it back to Stellenbosch, get the nutrition done, and then work out how they're going to do the mixes, basically.
And we also looked at indigenous forests, so this was so nice to see. When we walked up the hill, we crossed some indigenous trees, and it was really nice to see them, and we learned that it's also difficult to keep up those indigenous forests, which are really important for different purposes. And then we had the focus groups in Makheni. So again, we had a group of women gathering, and then the men, again, you can see quite a big group. So we had lots of people coming, which was great. And then we had food again, and the women doing the cooking. So it's amazing, the women did the cooking and participated, and did the cooking and participated. So you can see all the different tasks that women do.
Was James there to do the washing up?
I was there to chivvy everyone along. I do have other outfits, by the way. I'm just conscious in every picture I'm wearing the same clothes I'm wearing.
Why is it only James and not women?
I asked myself the same question.
They gathered around James, and they wanted a specific photo with James.
Maybe he's a master chef.
Maybe. I do all the cooking at home.
Now I see why you divided women and men. You wanted James to be with women.
So now we're in Guadane. Again, we did the transect walk, walking up a hill again. And as you know, Guadane is the highest, is located the highest village. So you already also have an overview of some of the other villages. So Nokutula, who is here, she can't be here today because I heard she has a job, which is great. Actually, who's here from Guadane? Yeah, excellent, great. And so yes, again, we had a nice walk, lots of insights from Guadane, and then also the focus groups. And here we gathered in this nice house, and Nokutula helped drawing a map. And here you can see the men's focus groups. And maybe James, you want to say something?
Yeah, and this one was really nice because it was outside, and it was a kind of a group that was manageable within the time. And one of the things we focused on was drawing this map right at the start of the meeting to get people to conceptualise the kind of grazing resources and other resources that are associated with the rangeland. And what that was useful for was to use it at the end of the meeting to say, if you could envisage anything differently, how would you re-envisage your resources? It could be anything in terms of fencing, it could be less wattle, and they actually came out with some really interesting points that we'll kind of recap on at the end of this.
Yeah, so all these meetings were really nice, rich and building relationships. To me, that's always key. To spend time, to learn about the area, and to build relationships. And then again, the cooking. So there was cooking outside, there was cooking inside. So this was the outside, this was inside. I was allowed also to stir a bit. It's heavy work. It's really heavy work. And then we shared food. So yeah, overall, really nice experience.
I wonder how was that pub that was dead?
Well, maybe the others who were there can say. All the food was really nice. And I want to just say the photos you see here, I have more photos, so that's a little appreciation from our side. After the workshop, the community members, please take the photos from your communities, so you can take them home and share with the people who are not here now. Yeah, I made a number of photos, so I hope you can share with everyone we met. So the photos that are here, and I have more, you can take home. And I think we might put these photos in a report as well.
Yeah.
So. And then also, Nikki, I just want to show this because we had a great day looking at one of the charcoal projects, and we learned a lot. So Nikki invited us to come, and here's the group of volunteers, and what's his name again?
Dave Engelbrecht.
Dave Engelbrecht, yeah. He explained how they do it, and this is the local entrepreneur, his name is Timiso, yeah. So we learned a lot about charcoal, how you prepare it, how you prepare the wattle, how you actually do it. So this was really great and gave us lots of insights, and we could share in some of the villages we went later. We shared, we said, there are actually projects happening, there's a lot happening, and it's something that some of the young people, the youth, said they might be interested in doing as an income generation, and how to use what you have. So using the resources that you have was a key issue in our interactions with people, because there are resources, but what do we do with them? How do we use them? And they benefit us. Yeah, so with these insights, that's the background and the context we should think about when we now share some of the findings from the focus groups and also from other conversations we had. So we want to take you through some of this as a basis for this afternoon and for the coming day.
Not long, it's only going to be 6 slides just to kind of round up just really pithy synthesis of what came out of those. So it's all themed around the key kind of elements we wanted in the focus groups. So the first one was we asked people, what's your use of rangeland? And obviously we asked that to different groups, men and women. And what's really nice about that is it came out with quite contrasting approaches or conceptualizations of rangeland use. So the men very much focused on, it's about livestock, it's about grazing, crop production and provision of water for people and for stock. The women were slightly different, weren't they?
Yes, so the women often mentioned first what they do with other resources that they get from the rangelands. So for example, of course, the wood, using wood for firewood, using wood for building, construction, fences. Thatching grass was a huge issue, and we will come back to that later. So there's a lack, the thatching grass has disappeared. And also, of course, herbs and medicinal plants, which women often gather in the indigenous forests. So these are various uses, also partly contributing to the food of the household. And women, of course, we know, deal more with smaller livestock, but also for them, smaller livestock grazing land is important. And what women especially emphasize, that there's a lack of interest of young people in agriculture. So that was a key issue, again, the youth. And yeah, overall, everybody saw wattle. The invasion of wattle was one of the first things every man and women mentioned, that it's invading the grassland, it's invading the living areas. So it is a problem, it's getting too much, and you can see from walking, our transect walks, we got an idea of the extent of wattle that is growing.
I'm just worried about those herbs that are raised by women.
Who wants that?
Those herbs, they make me worried. Especially being raised by women only, not men. And that raises lots of questions.
Well, the men did mention it as well, but it was mainly the women that focused more on it. So if you gave an exhaustive list of what the rangeland's used for, the men did mention things like medicinal herbs, timber, fuel wood, but their focus was more towards livestock.
But they're here, they can explain why those herbs are used.
Most traditional killers are women.
No, he's not there.
Okay, but we will have more time in the afternoon. We will talk exactly about these issues. So we will talk about users and who's doing what. So for the afternoon, we can engage in these issues.
So one of the other main things we focused on was kind of governance and resource management. So what are the institutions that pertain to these villages? And also how are people kind of managing livestock movement, if at all? So there was pretty much a consensus from both groups, we think, in these governance issues in the communities, particularly in terms of the way management of stock has changed. So people would say that historically there was an ability through herd boys in particular, this is a theme that came back to all the time, is the ability to herd depended on using boys who are now at school. So these boys would be able to primarily keep the animals off the arable lands, so you didn't have the conflict with crops, but also they would herd them kind of in different compartments of rangeland at different parts of the season. So there was some kind of seasonal rotation facilitated through focus on these herd boys. And also the local institutions like headmen and chiefs. For example, if cattle strayed onto fields and grazed crops, they were able to levy fines if these rules were transgressed, and impound cattle, and levy fines on the owners. So it doesn't seem that capacity is there as much anymore, and certainly it seems that people don't grow crops anymore on these fields. So in a general absence of either active herding or the availability of fencing, there's no attempt now to cultivate the arable lands. Every village we went to, there was some sections where there'd been some initiatives to fence, but there was very little cultivation of the arable lands. And I think in the next slide we'll show you that there's been a retreat to the home garden. So it's almost like a retreat from the collective to the private space for production around crops, which is an interesting thing. And there's several factors which might exacerbate this. So it was difficult to get to a consensus about whether betterment had ever been part of these villages. If it was, in terms of restructuring and planning, it was fairly minimal, but there'd certainly been some rearrangement of the villages, and also that meant that different villages now had less or more access to rangeland, which was an issue for some of these villages. And so there is some attempt at the kind of reinvigoration of some local institutions, but they're kind of things like the Grazing Association. And do you want to say about the? Yeah,
some of you mentioned the grazing associations and sharing some knowledge from those discussions. So what our experience was that women often didn't really know that they can join the associations. And in some communities, they were actually encouraged. So the men, the leaders, the chief said, we want women to join. so that we have more shared discussions, and women also were keen. So we heard in some of the groups that women were keen to join, and some of the older women who were members, they explained how you do it, even if you don't have livestock or big livestock, even if you don't have livestock at all. So the key issue here is probably to be in an association to unite and to discuss the things that are of interest to the whole community. So we found there's a lot of value, and the grazing associations are respected, seem to be respected institutions that can provide a basis for meeting and sharing.
So we just want to look at a few of the implications of what we were just talking about in the previous slide. So I've mentioned the kind of retreat to home gardens, and that's, hopefully, it's a little bit small, but it's captured in this picture here. It's a little bit blurry, so sorry about that, but these are pictures of the home gardens with the mealies about to be cropped on this, or the stover left there. And in one of them, there's actually somebody producing forage. So people are actually growing forage for cattle as well to meet the dry season deficit. But there's also things like this. They're actually becoming spaces for dry season cattle production or livestock production as well. So you can see that the bottom one there, someone's got huge bales of forage there. And this guy also had a kind of quite intensified production space for cattle as well. So the ones that can are retreating more to this kind of notion of private production and leaving the commons to itself. So there's some very interesting lines to kind of follow up on here. And I think one of the other issues, of course, was the thatching grass. So this has always been a key kind of commodity within villages. And it just struck me that everybody said, we can no longer access thatching grass. There's no fences behind which it accumulates anymore. We have to drive to the commercial farmers on the road to Cedarville and buy it from them. And they're not actually allowed, apparently, to collect it from the roadside because the municipality controls that. So, but I see people in town with backies full of this stuff. So there's clearly a lucrative business going on, but to me it should be a foundation of livelihoods that people can collect that in their own community. So again, it's another line that provides kind of an interesting amount of investigation. So the kind of lack of central control in terms of strong institutions for management actually makes it quite difficult for some of these interventions around these grazing interventions. One thing that struck us that everyone said was that where the grazing interventions have been instigated, it works within the community, but if you share the space with multiple communities, it becomes much more difficult to police that. So it's about these shared visions between communities in terms of governance. Okay, you want me to?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Again, so we asked another section on livestock production and some of the constraints to that. So pretty consistent again between men and women. And the big thing that came through in this straight away was wattle. So one of the key limitations, constraints on production is the presence of wattle, obviously because it reduces the available grazing area. But it also, very interestingly, people mentioned theft and predation, and they linked theft and predation of livestock to this proliferation of wattle. So they said that thieves hide in the wattle, so there's more chance now of more thieves being around and being more difficult to trace as well afterwards. But also with predation, they said things like jackals and caracals, there's more of this, there's more cover for them as well, so the small stock are being predated more. Water was mentioned as a key factor, and again can be linked to wattle invasion. So the presence of water for livestock, but also interestingly, and we'll come back to this at the end, the presence of potable water for people as well. With the absence of the streams, they rely on standpipes, which apparently the municipality limits water availability at certain times of the year, so they actually cut the supplies off to people, or at least reduce them, which is a big problem for them. And other things to do with things like disease and ticks. So they all said that at some stage there had been dipping facilities in the villages, but they were no longer functional. So high tick loads on the animals and disease burden, morbidity. I know CSA has been very involved in trying to address some of this, and they all mentioned how much CSA had helped with some of these initiatives, particularly kind of vaccination and also livestock sales as well. One of the interesting things they mentioned about the sales platforms is They really valued those in 2017, but they'd like to see more of that and the rotation between the villages. So I think that's definitely a line that was very, very positive there.
So now we come back to the wattle that has been coming through as a theme the whole time. So we asked specifically about perceptions for, regarding wattle, but the wattle issue came up from the first questions. So all men and women said that the wattle has limitations on their livestock production, crop production, and water availability, as we just said. And for women, I think this is a very important issue. We heard lots of experiences that women fear for their safety when they have to go through the wattle, and so it's not safe for them to go. There were incidences. I mean, rape is common, and we could share more in the focus in the afternoon discussions on this. So it's a serious issue, the safety, and then we had a number of positive perceptions also among both groups. So of course you can use the wattle for different purposes, and it's good to see that also in what you can do with it. So charcoal, we mentioned that already. Using it for your own firewood, fuel wood, and building and fencing and so on. Also windbreak and shade for livestock. Of course the Working for Water program is there, also providing job opportunities, although there have been some problems with the funds, as we heard. And it can be as a livestock feed also, at times when there's not enough fodder. Also, I think men and women said this, the wattle, the bark, I think if you boil it or if you use it with water, it can treat diarrhea in livestock and in people as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So both men and women said this.
Can I just come back to this? I mean, this is one of the strands we're keen to investigate as part of the project, but it does show that there is a kind of already an initiative, some initiatives in the village to do this use of the wattle for a feed. Not many people do it. Some of them says that things like goats will naturally browse it during the dry season. But there are some initiatives by some community members to try some of these wattle feed ideas.
And then we had a question, what would you like, how would you envisage alternative of future land use? So what could you do instead of what the current status is? And again, we had a lot of common understanding from men and women. So the wattle, as much as it causes problems, but you can also benefit from it to some extent. So we already discussed this.
Yeah.
Then water availability, that's a key issue, of course, water. So having more water available, not just for the livestock, but also for people, which is an issue in these areas, especially in times of drought.
And the fencing was a very interesting one. Certainly in all the male focus groups, something that was mentioned at the end was it would be nice to have fencing, specifically around the arable lands, but many people also mentioned camps as well. So it would be interesting to explore more whether that's a substitution for authority in some ways. But what actually people said was, with the dynamics of the communities the way they are now, it's impossible to exercise authority without a fence. If you have a strong fence, you can say, if your cattle come in here, we have the right to impound them. Without it, there is always the risk if somebody kind of unilaterally, even if they're mandated to do it, impound someone's cow, they can be accused of stealing it. So, it's, to me, there's always problems with fencing in terms of long-term maintenance, but I could understand where people are coming from with this idea. But so we put it to them, the guys in the communities, what about social fencing? What about the reinstatement of herders, the younger people in the communities that don't have jobs? But one of the issues they raised with this was these guys can't herd at night as well, and these cattle come at night a lot. But it's an interesting thing that can be explored maybe over the next couple of days, is this issue of fencing. It's always controversial in these communities. And it's who pays for it, how is it maintained, will it make much difference, etc. But yeah.
Yeah, and especially women mentioned skills, building skills. So we already heard about alternative livelihood strategies. all the things women do to use natural resources in various ways. So this came strongly out in each of the focus groups, that it would be great to build skills on gardening, so growing food, how to use the bottle, poultry production, piggeries. So all of these issues, and also young women were interested, but also other skills mentioned were sewing or becoming a paravet. And when we encourage the youth to talk, it's not always, they don't always want to do into agriculture or farming as such, but there are many other important skills like a paravet that you need in a community. So it can be a diverse range of activities. So this is really nice. It came out in the focus groups. Yeah, so this is a summary of the main points we made. Before we go into it, James, I'm just wondering, we haven't mentioned stock theft here, but stock theft was one of the key issues.
We did
or was it
mention
in the
one.
beginning? Yeah. So stock theft, of course, is an important issue.
Yeah. So just to kind of summarise, I think it's fair to say that these rangelands are still an important mainstay of local livelihoods, but there's obviously issues around the management and production within them. So institutional capacity is a big issue, and cohesion between communities in terms of land management. Wattle was mentioned by absolutely everyone in every single focus group. The first thing that came out was wattle as an exacerbating issue for all of these impacts on production. Dry season crop production, crop production and also dry season livestock production has retreated to home gardens, which is an interesting, but it seems to be a generic thing across certain.
Is to have 800 or 1,000 cattle, then a dipping tank should be organized around that settlement. Then we need to understand that so that we can take it up, because there are some budgets that are provided for such issues through the Comprehensive Agricultural Support Program. That one can be resolved, it can be attended to. It's a matter of talking to the district office that is managing that. But that will depend on livestock numbers in that area. Meaning which, if you have got 2 cattle or you have 10 or 100, let me say 100, it might be difficult to provide a living there. But if you meet the standard and the norm, then
it's 12 villages, I think, isn't it? 12 in Umdanyani, the cluster. Umdanyani is a collective name, but it's about 12 different settlements. So lots of cattle.
And then the livestock numbers?
The total of about 1,000 or so cattle.
Oh, okay. But that will need to be investigated, as well as the bureau before last, especially the part that says very limited extension services to address. It's worrying, it's a very worrying factor. I would need to understand that being a person who is responsible for extension and advisory services in Pretoria. So I would need to get clarity on that one. How was it raised, and how I would understand if it talks to ratios of extension vis-a-vis the number of farmers, then I understand. But if there is no extension services altogether, then I would have to take that with me.
There is, I think they said there is some, but it's maybe not enough.
But please take those issues, all the issues we discussed now, bring them into the afternoon groups discussion. We will have much more opportunities, so we can follow up on all of these issues. And thanks for bringing them up here as an immediate reaction. There was another comment, yes?
Okay, thank you. On the matters of governance, I wanted to raise an issue here. Our farmers, I think they need an encouragement, maybe from us, the extension officers. The farmers, they tend to keep the big heads of cattle, and they still have that mentality of having the large livestock, the large numbers. It doesn't help, because they just keep the animals for the sake of keeping them, with no knowledge of being in business. I think the issue of the stock sales, it needs to be given more attention so that they can reduce their numbers, because they keep them until they are old and they just die, and it will be the feast for the village. So the mindset of business, it needs to be put in their minds.
Any other comment? Yes? And maybe let's close at 1:45. Yeah, we have two minutes left. Yes.
Okay, I think as a slight message on issues of policy and regulations, those communities are aware of applicable legislation, such as, for example, Conservation of Agricultural Resources Act. And I saw somewhere in the slides you mentioned issues of stock theft. Are all the animals marked according to the Animal Identification Act? You know, those kind of, so I think maybe, I don't know if that was an issue that was discussed.
It was raised in one of the men's groups in Guadani, I think, and they said that would be something that they would love to have, because that was actually a big thing that was discussed for about half an hour at the end in terms of envisaging alternatives. If they could get that, then, because one guy said his stock was stolen and he went all the way to Mount Frere because he got a tip off of where they were and found them in someone's garden. And he didn't just find his, he found 3 or 4 other guys. And the guy said, no, I bought these things. I went to Umbenyani and I bought them. He had no certification, nothing. But he said if they're branded for the stock, for the cattle, and they're ear tagged for the small stock, it would make it easier. Yeah.
But one of the purposes of this workshop is you are here, so that's why we invited you at the policy level and extension services, and to discuss exactly these issues, and for the communities to be able to bring this back to their communities. So this is why. So this was just the first step of focus groups, and we couldn't, as you can imagine, one focus group we couldn't explore all the issues, but they came up. And now this is the second step of going in more depth and getting your insights into these regulations that we need to know and everybody needs to know. And then where do I go? You know, who do I ask? How do I get the extension officers into my area? How do I discuss these things? So this is exactly why we're here. So we can maybe develop some practical steps and something coming out of this. And a lot is already happening now, of course.
I would really request that we maybe have a space to discuss the conservation agreements approach with the grazing associations, because so much of this is encompassed in that. It's been worked through, it's been challenging, Heidi knows the deal, Patient's been through it. I think we've discussed it with some of the Dr. Dara colleagues, Sisnoluga Bayo previously, and we're talking about getting together and sharing paravets. My request is maybe to spend 10 or 15 minutes talking about it, because it's a really great mechanism to pull so many of these challenges together and turn them around into incentives rather than seeing the negatives that are coming up. The fencing issues, the governance issues, the penalties, the bylaws, the compliance, bringing in incentives like subsidizing registration and branding through the DAF, the certification system. So most of the farmers in the upper catchment have registered, and it's something that we've built into the conservation agreement, the transaction. So we will provide X in exchange for farmers coming together, forming an association, signing, agreeing on what they're going to do, what are the bylaws going to say about transgressions and penalties, water access, thatch grass, bringing women in through wool and shearing incentives. It's really, and we've got Mr. Conservation Agreement expert here.
Yeah, I just wanted, just 2 seconds, because looking at the problems that have been raised, I personally believe that there is a gap between the NGOs and the government offices. Because if we didn't have that gap, we would be talking language now, and I think they will be understanding better these problems from the communities, because we are dealing directly with the communities. We know all these problems. So I think, as Nikki said, if we can have maybe 15 minutes or so and discuss it. And secondly, I'll also suggest that maybe if we can work together with them, doing the outreach together, maybe they can understand more and clearly, because my experience is this, people in the rural areas, there is a problem there because we're dealing with elderly people, uneducated people, there's a lack of knowledge. So for them to get the assistance or help, we need to go to the people and hear what are the problems and how to solve them. So I think coming together of NGOs and the government people will solve the problem.
what I would like to suggest, we separate into groups in the afternoon. There will be one policy group, and then I would suggest that those members of NGOs who want to discuss these issues, you go into that policy group and discuss exactly this. So there will be time, most of the afternoon, to go in much more depth. So we will explain later. The first groups that we have is separating into the different stakeholder groups. Tomorrow we will mix the groups, but today we want to know what are these issues, and the NGO organizations can go, they can see which group they want to go to. So we will have one policy group, we will have one academic group of academics, and we will have one group of community members. And all the issues that we have here and other issues we can discuss in more depth, and then we bring it all together. So this will be for the afternoon. So I suggest that we close here with these really good ideas. Thank you for all these contributions, and we will continue with this in the afternoon.
Yeah. Lunch is being served, I think.
We should go